Welcome. So, we have been discussing how plasticity is implemented and explain and is used to explain variety of phenomena. And we have so far looked at short term plasticity, bit of long term plasticity in terms of adaptation and also in terms of attention. And so, now we will talk about implementation of long term plasticity to explain some developmental phenomena in terms of how circuitry develops in the cortex over development, over the periods of development. So, in this case, if you recall, our cortex is a layered structure with layer 1, layer 2, 3, layer 4, layer 5 and layer 6. And of this, our layer 4 is the thalamo-recipient layer. So, thalamus, which takes information from more subcortical stages from originally from the periphery, finally via the thalamus the input comes and makes synapses on neurons in layer 4, and then processing in the cortex starts there, and it carries forward in terms of going to layer 2, 3 or other regions wherever it is required. So, but the circuitry is not like this thalamus to layer 4 connection, which is the probably the beginning of the cortical processing. It is not like this when the brain is developing. It is quite different. So, and there are stages through which this happens, and initially what happens is that there is a layer of neurons called subplate neurons, and these are present transiently. So, the layer 1 to 6 is not there at that time. There is cortical plate that comes out from there later on, but what is present is only the subplate layer of neurons first. And it is the thalamic axons actually come and make synapses on to the subplate neurons, SP neurons. And they then actually, when the other neurons or other layers are developing, neurons actually propagate through the subplate region, and there are collaterals of axons from the thalamus or that make connections with layer 4 neurons. So, this is a layer 4 input neuron, the layer 4 subplate neuron, and there are connections between the subplate neuron and the layer 4 neuron. So, we have then gradually with development, what happens is that these two die away, and the subplate layers, as I said, was transient, that also goes away, and what we get is this final circuitry in the adult. And this subplate is present in a very short, I mean not short, I mean in a very specific period of time during development, and it also happens to coincide with some of the critical period plasticity that is observed in the sensory systems, that is manipulations of the environment in which the animal is growing causes profound changes in the circuitry and behavior that last for the lifelong, but the same kind of environmental changes after the critical period do not induce such permanent changes. So, it is thought that that the subplate neurons can play a role in this kind of critical period plasticity. So, if we now go back step by step, it is the most interesting part is later on. This is the subplate neuron, and let us say we have a thalamic neuron. So, initially it is like this, then there is a second part that let us mark it with this blue. And then finally, from here it becomes what we have discussed, that is the thalamus, this is layer 4, the thalamus directly to the layer 4. So, how is this kind of thing achieved? From the initial stages, and then it goes on to the case where the subplate neurons output dies away, and the thalamus to subplate neuron input also goes away because the subplate is not there anymore. So, and how is the blue synapse in the top getting strengthened? So, if you think about it, let us say the thalamus is providing spike train inputs onto the subplate neuron. Let us say, or I mean there is evidence that supports it, that this synapse, thalamus to subplate synapse, let us call it TS, synapse TS. This synapse TS is strong. That is, this synapse can make the subplate neuron fire action potentials. So, whenever there is a spike in the thalamus, because of the synapse TS, almost all the time the subplate neuron is also producing action potentials. Now, the blue synapse, the synapse, let us call this the synapse T4, that is weak. So, it is not being able to drive the layer 4 neuron initially. So, because the thalamus to subplate synapse is strong, the subplate neuron is firing action potentials, and if the subplate to layer 4 synapse is strong, it will make the layer 4 synapse fire action potentials. So, if this is, let us call this the synapse subplate layer 4 S4. So, what is happening is, with a synaptic delay, layer 4 neuron is producing action potentials. So, essentially what is happening, that the thalamic action potential is causing the layer 4 neuron to fire via the subplate. So, thalamic action potential is causing the layer 4 neuron to fire action potentials via the subplate. So, this is the layer 4, this is the subplate thalamus, I am sorry, this is the subplate and this is the layer 4 neuron. So, with gradual synaptic delays, the layer 4 neuron is firing action potentials after the thalamic input. And remember, when there is a thalamic spike, there is a spike along this cyan terminals, along this particular line. So, that is an action potential in this path is also an action potential in this path, they are collaterals. However, this synapse is unable to drive the layer 4 neuron. But if you now see the thalamic spike, which is, now let us consider this particular synapse that is extremely weak, that is our thalamus to layer 4 synapse. So, what is happening here, that presynaptically the thalamus is firing action potentials, and postsynaptically layer 4 just a little later is firing action potentials, not due to this particular spike, not due to the spike in that is in the presynaptic terminal from the thalamus to layer 4, but due to a spike that is being caused through the subplate neuron from the thalamus to subplate to layer 4. So, however, with this scenario, there is a pairing, STDP type pairing in that particular ST4 synapse. It is as if that the input from the thalamus is causing the spike in layer 4 through that synapse, but it is actually not through that synapse, it is something else is driving the postsynaptic neuron indirectly, and it is as if that it is a causal phenomena from input from the thalamic synapse to the layer 4 synapse. And so, because of that, this correlated activity in the layer 4 and the thalamus to layer 4 synapse, you get strengthening of the ST4 synapse, and as the ST4 synapse strengthens and strengthens, what happens is that the layer 4 is now being driven, gradually being driven directly by the thalamic input. So, if we go here, what is happening is we are getting long term potentiation initially at this thalamus to layer 4 neuron synapse, because of the pairing that is being caused by the same thalamic input via the subplate. This is being potentiated LTP in this one. So, now what is happening, as the thalamic synapse on layer 4 gets stronger, the thalamus itself is capable of firing, making the layer 4 neuron fire action potentials. So, now if we have a thalamus action potential here in these cases, these particular time points, the layer 4 neuron is firing action potentials at one synapse delay only. So, this is basically synaptic delay here, this is the synaptic delay here and so on. So, but now what is happening to the spike that is coming through the subplate neuron based on the same thalamic input? Now, that is now becoming acausal. It will depend on the exact delays that you implement in here, but you can it is becoming acausal in the sense that the layer 4 neuron is now firing action potentials before the subplate output to the layer 4 neuron, because thalamus is now directly driving layer 4. So, there is one synapse delay now that is coming in between the subplate input and the thalamic input to layer 4. So, that way what happens is there is long term depression in this particular synapse, and this will gradually die away. So, since the subplate output is getting going to die away, what happens is basically since the output activity is gone, the subplate is not playing a role anymore, and that pathway is abolished. And in fact, the subplate neurons go through apoptosis. There is another idea that they get integrated in some other form in neurons in layer 5 and 6. However, the ultimate objective of removing and driving the layer 4 through the subplate, where this part of the circuitry now goes away and the LTP in this synapse finally causes the thalamocortical circuitry to form. So, this has been an idea that is present, that subplate neurons are involved in developing the thalamocortical circuitry. And this can be actually easily modeled with leaky integrate and fired neurons, leaky integrate and fired neurons in of subplate and layer 4, and with spike timing dependent plasticity at these synapses. Actually, only the 2 synapses on layer 4 is sufficient to show that. So, now the question is what is the implication of this? Okay. So, there are phenomena that can be shown to happen during development that are dependent on the subplate. That is, if the subplate is removed, then ocular dominance columns do not develop, and so that with monocular deprivation what is expected, that is not seen, and these can be actually replicated with the same ideas in a model where you incorporate long term potentiation and long term depression with spike timing dependent plasticity in these synapses during development. So, there are many examples of models where the long term potentiation, long term depression or spike timing dependent plasticity can come and play a role in explaining phenomena and in the modeling of these phenomena. So, continuing with the idea of the subplate and this long term potentiation and depression, there are cases where you can you actually have, let us say, another developmental developmental plasticity that has been observed is the expansion of tonotopic area of a particular tone frequency. So, in this particular case, as we have discussed, let us say this area is representative of the primary auditory cortex, and there is tonotopy, which what we mean by that is that there is an ordered arrangement of neurons selective to low frequencies on one end and high frequencies on the other end, and there is a gradual change in the selectivity of the different frequencies across the surface of the primary auditory cortex or A1. And during critical period, if one particular frequency is presented repeatedly in mice or rats, these experiments and also other species, it has been shown that there is an expansion. So, originally if this frequency f naught has a representation region that is within those 2 vertical bars within that band, let us say neurons in this region in normally developing animals represent 7 kilohertz frequencies, that neurons in this region respond strongly or are most sensitive to 7 kilohertz. And now, during critical period, if the animal is exposed to 7 kilohertz continuously for those 4 days with repeated gaps, then this area is expanded, that is the number of neurons now responding to the 7 kilohertz increases in terms of the area covered by those neurons in the cortical region. And so, this expansion in the number of neurons in over the tonotopic axis is a developmental phenomena. So, in the sense that if you present this 7 kilohertz, the same protocol, to an animal that has passed the critical period, and then you look at its tonotopy, then this kind of change does not happen. So, obviously, in the there is machinery or things in the critical period that are not present later on, and that allow this to happen during only that developmental period. And so, similarly, just like the previous example, in this case also we can do a modeling with the subplate neurons. So, in the other case we are looking at a single neuron output in layer 4, and in this case we will look at multiple neurons in layer 4 as the output neurons. And let us say you have subplate neurons here. So, this is the subplate layer, this is the layer 4 layer, and let us say these are the different frequency channels. This is representing the different frequency channels. So, let us say low frequency to high frequency, and repeating the same circuitry we have this, let us say, is the thalamus. We have low frequencies to high frequencies on the two ends, and inputs from here come and project onto the subplate neurons, and then a weak input goes on to the layer 4 neurons, and there is a strong input from the subplate neuron to the layer 4 neuron, and this kind of thing is present across the frequencies. But additionally, if we now keep convergence and divergence. So, what I mean by that is that now we will go into a more abstract way of representing it. This is the thalamus layer, this is the subplate layer, this is the layer 4 layer. If the thalamus now projects to subplate from multiple frequencies, multiple regions of the frequency axis, and the same is projecting to layer 4 neurons, but weaker synapses, and the subplate layer, this here, is also projecting with some profile in terms of convergence onto one neuron in layer 4. If you have a network developed in this manner with this particular profile of inputs from thalamus to layer 4 that is weak, then first of all, with normal activity of thalamus, you can show that the layer 4 will develop a sort of a tuning, that is layer 4 will sort of develop a tonotopic axis, which is very obviously expected based on the arrangement of the inputs. And our previous example where we have the thalamic input to layer 4 getting stronger based on the indirect spiking of layer 4 through the subplate. Now, in this same model, you can now do the exposure to a one particular frequency during development when the subplate neuron is present. And that again, because of that overexposure to that particular frequency, and the divergence and convergence of inputs throughout the three layers, you can actually easily show the expansion of the tonotopic expansion of the particular frequency in the tonotopic axis in that comes about in layer 4. So, if you have one particular frequency, you will find that the neurons in layer 4 in a wider range of neurons become more selective to the exposed frequency, which is this f naught. So, these are examples of how you can incorporate long term plasticity in like STDP, as we saw, in explaining a variety of phenomena. The explicit exercise of doing the model, I leave it up to you, and it is not totally feasible to do the modeling in this course itself by showing you the modeling. I am only taking you through the idea, and if you are interested, then you can do it yourself. Now that you know that how you implement the leaky, integrate and fire model, all these you have basically two types of neurons, supplant neuron and layer 4 neuron, and you have you can have a multiple number of them obviously, and you know how to incorporate a synapse, and you can also incorporate the spike timing dependent plasticity in these cases, or if you want to use a rate based model, you can use a rate based model, which has problems associated with it, but you can now actually embark on this path of taking up projects where you explain phenomena or plasticity phenomena with these kind of models in using leaky, integrate and fire neurons and spike timing dependent plasticity. So, with this we come to the end of our module on plasticity, in implementation of plasticity and explaining variety of phenomena in the different cases. And so, we will go on to our next week for discussions on theoretical aspects of plasticity and some ideas of optimal coding, and I think some research problems, current topics that we can, that will be useful for you. Thank you.